Rosa had always believed she was meant to live a small life. Not a bad life, just a quiet one. The kind of life that nobody writes about. The kind where you wake up, go to work, come home, and do it all over again. She had made peace with that a long time ago. Or at least she thought she had. At 34 years old, Rosa worked as a night cleaner at a community center in a small town in Ohio. It wasn't glamorous work. Most nights, she pushed a mop across the same floors, wiped down the same tables, and emptied the same trash cans. The building was old and creaky, and when everyone went home for the night, it became her world. Just her, the hum of the heating system, and the echo of her footsteps on the tile floors. She didn't mind the loneliness. In fact, she preferred it. Rosa had never been good with people. She wasn't shy exactly, but she had learned early in life that it was easier to stay in the background. When you grow up the way she did, you learn that attention isn't always a good thing. Rosa had spent most of her childhood moving from one foster home to another. She never stayed anywhere long enough to call it home. Some houses were okay. Some were not. But none of them were hers. She learned to keep her head down, stay out of trouble, and not expect too much from anyone. By the time she turned 18 and aged out of the system, she had no family, no savings, and no idea what to do next. She found work where she could, waitressing, stocking shelves, cleaning offices. Nothing ever stuck for long. But 5 years ago, she landed the job at the community center, and for the first time, something felt stable. The pay wasn't great, but it was enough. She had a small apartment nearby, a used car that mostly worked, and a routine she could count on. That was more than she'd ever had before. Most people who worked at the center during the day didn't even know her name. She was just the woman who came in after they left and made sure the place was clean by morning. Sometimes a staff member would stay late and give her a quick nod. Sometimes a parent picking up their kid from an evening program would hold the door for her. But mostly, Rosa moved through the building like a ghost, present but unseen. She told herself she was fine with that. What else did she need? Friends? She had tried that before, and it never worked out. Dreams? Those were for people who had the time and money to chase them. Rosa had neither. She had survival, and that had always been enough. But sometimes, late at night when the building was empty and the world outside was dark, Rosa felt something she couldn't quite name. It was like a low hum in her chest, a restlessness that wouldn't go away. She would pause in the middle of mopping a floor or wiping a window and just stand there, staring at nothing. In those moments, she felt like she was waiting for something, but she had no idea what. One cold evening in November, Rosa was working her usual shift. The temperature had dropped hard that week, and the old heating system was struggling to keep up. She could see her breath in some of the back hallways. She pulled her sweater tighter and kept moving, pushing her cleaning cart from room to room. She had just finished the main hall and was heading toward the storage area in the back of the building. It was a part of the center she rarely went to. There wasn't much back there except old equipment, broken chairs, and boxes of holiday decorations that only came out once a year. She usually just gave the hallway a quick sweep and moved on. But that night, something caught her eye. There was a door at the end of the hallway. Rosa had seen it 100 times before. It was always locked, and she had assumed it was just another storage closet. But tonight the door was slightly open. A thin crack of darkness showed where it hadn't latched properly. Rosa stopped. She looked around, even though she knew no one else was there. The building was completely silent except for the distant rattle of the heating vents. She should have just closed the door and kept walking. That would have been the smart thing to do. But something about that open door pulled at her. It was like an itch she couldn't ignore. She walked over and pushed the door open slowly. The hinges groaned in protest, and a wave of cold, stale air hit her face. She reached inside and felt along the wall until she found a light switch. When she flipped it on, a single bulb flickered to life above her head. The room was bigger than she expected. It was packed with forgotten things. Old folding tables leaned against one wall. Stacks of plastic chairs sat covered in dust. There were boxes everywhere, some labeled, most not. Christmas lights tangled in a pile near the corner. A broken basketball hoop lay on the floor like it had been tossed there and forgotten. But none of that mattered. Because in the far corner of the room, hidden beneath a gray tarp that had gone yellow with age, was something that made Rosa's heart skip a beat. She didn't know what it was at first, just a large shape, covered and forgotten like everything else in the room. But something about it drew her closer. She stepped over a box of old trophies and made her way toward it. When she reached the corner, she grabbed the edge of the tarp and pulled. The fabric fell away, and Rosa stood there, frozen. It was a piano. A grand piano, old and dusty, but still beautiful in a way that took her breath away. The black surface had gone dull under years of neglect, and a few of the keys had turned yellow with age. But it was whole, it was real, and it was the most incredible thing Rosa had ever seen. She didn't know anything about pianos. She had never played one, never taken a lesson, never even thought about music as something that could be part of her life. Growing up, there was no room for things like that. Music was for other people. People with money, people with families who encouraged them to try new things. Not for someone like her. But standing there in that cold storage room, looking at this forgotten instrument, Rosa felt something stir inside her. It was the same restless feeling she had carried for years, but now it had a focus. It was pointing at this piano like a compass finding north. She looked around again, still alone, still silent. Her hands were shaking as she reached out and lifted the cover over the keys. The ivory was cold under her fingertips. She pressed down on one key, and a single note rang out through the room. It was slightly out of tune, but it didn't matter. The sound filled the space around her and seemed to hang in the air like a question. Rosa sat down on the old bench. She didn't know what she was doing. She didn't know why she was doing it. But for the first time in as long as she could remember, she wasn't thinking about what made sense or what was safe. She placed both hands on the keys, and something inside her woke up. Rosa didn't know what she was expecting when her fingers touched those keys. Maybe a clumsy noise, maybe nothing at all. She had never played a piano in her life. She didn't even know where middle C was or what the black keys were for. She was just a cleaner sitting in a cold storage room at 11 o'clock at night, touching an instrument she had no business touching. But when she pressed down, something happened that she couldn't explain. Not then. And not for a long time after. It started with one note, then another. Her right hand moved across the keys like it had done this 1,000 times before. Her left hand followed, finding a rhythm that matched perfectly. She wasn't thinking about what to play. She wasn't thinking at all. Her fingers just moved and music came out. At first, Rosa thought she was imagining it. This couldn't be real. She must be hitting random keys, and her tired brain was making sense of the noise. But no, this wasn't random. This was a melody, a real melody, rising and falling, building and resting, like a story being told without words. She kept playing. She couldn't stop. It was like her hands had taken over, and she was just along for the ride. The notes filled the storage room and bounced off the concrete walls. They slipped through the cracks in the door and floated down the empty hallway. And Rosa just sat there, her eyes wide, her heart pounding, watching her own fingers do something impossible. The music was sad at first, slow and heavy, like the weight of all those years she had spent feeling invisible. It reminded her of rainy afternoons in foster homes where she didn't belong. It reminded her of bus rides to new towns where she didn't know anyone. It reminded her of every birthday she had spent alone, every holiday with no one to call, every night she had cried into her pillow and wondered if anyone in the world even knew she existed. But then the music changed. It lifted, little by little, like the sun coming up after a long, dark night. The notes grew lighter, brighter, more hopeful, and Rosa felt something break open inside her chest. Something she had kept locked away for as long as she could remember. Tears started falling down her cheeks. She didn't try to stop them. She just kept playing, letting the music pour out of her like water from a broken dam. All those feelings she had buried for years, all that pain she had swallowed and hidden away, it was all coming out now through her fingers and into the keys. She didn't know how long she played. It could have been 5 minutes. It could have been an hour. Time didn't exist in that room. There was only the music and the moment and the feeling that she had finally found something she didn't even know she was looking for. When she finally stopped, the last note hung in the air like a whisper. Then silence. Complete, heavy silence. Rosa sat there, staring at the piano. Her hands were trembling. Her face was wet with tears. Her whole body felt strange, like she had just woken up from a dream that was more real than her actual life. What just happened? She looked at her hands like they belonged to someone else. These were the same hands that pushed mops and scrubbed toilets and wiped down tables, the same hands that had never created anything beautiful in their entire existence. How did they just do that? Rosa stood up so fast that the bench scraped loudly against the floor. She backed away from the piano, her breath coming quick and shallow. She felt dizzy. She felt scared. She felt like she had just discovered something about herself that she wasn't ready to understand. She grabbed the tarp from the floor and threw it back over the piano, covering it up like it was something dangerous. Then she ran out of the room, flipped off the light, and pulled the door shut behind her. For the rest of her shift, Rosa couldn't focus. She went through the motions, emptying trash cans and wiping counters, but her mind was somewhere else entirely. She kept thinking about what had happened in that room. She kept hearing the music in her head, playing on repeat like a song she couldn't shake. By the time she clocked out and walked to her car, the sun was starting to come up. She sat behind the wheel for a long time, just staring at the steering wheel. Her hands were still shaking. Maybe it was a fluke, she told herself. Maybe she had just gotten lucky, hit the right keys by accident. That had to be it. There was no other explanation. People didn't just sit down at a piano and play like that, not without years of training. Not without lessons and practice and teachers showing them what to do. But even as she tried to convince herself, Rosa knew it wasn't true. What happened in that room wasn't luck. It wasn't an accident. It was something else. Something she couldn't explain. She drove home in a daze. She barely remembered the route. When she got to her apartment, she went straight to bed without eating or showering. She pulled the covers over her head and tried to sleep, but the music kept playing in her mind. Over and over, the same melody, the same notes, the same feeling of something breaking open and spilling out. She finally fell asleep around noon and didn't wake up until it was dark again. That night, Rosa went back to work like nothing had happened. She clocked in, grabbed her cart, and started her usual routine. She told herself she wasn't going to go back to that storage room. She told herself she was going to forget about the piano and move on with her life. It was just a weird thing that happened once. It didn't mean anything. But as the hours passed and the building emptied out, Rosa found herself drifting toward the back hallway. Her feet carried her there without permission. She stood in front of that door for a long time, her hand resting on the handle. Don't do it, she thought. Just walk away. Go back to your normal life. You don't need this. But she did need it. She realized that now. She needed to know if it was real. She needed to know if she could do it again. She opened the door. The piano was still there, hiding under the tarp like a secret waiting to be told. Rosa walked over slowly, her heart beating hard in her chest. She pulled back the cover and looked at those keys again. They seemed to glow in the dim light of the single bulb overhead. She sat down on the bench. She took a deep breath, and she started to play. This time, the music was different. It was faster, more alive, full of energy and motion. It made her think of running through open fields, of laughing until her stomach hurt, of all the joy she had missed out on as a child. Her fingers danced across the keys like they had been doing this forever. And once again, Rosa cried. But this time, they weren't sad tears. They were tears of wonder, tears of disbelief, tears of something that felt dangerously close to hope. She played for almost an hour that night. When she finally stopped, her arms were tired and her back was sore from sitting on that old bench. But she felt more alive than she had in years, maybe ever. Rosa covered the piano back up and turned off the light. As she walked down the hallway, she made a decision. She was going to come back. Every night if she had to. She was going to figure out what this gift was and where it came from. She was going to learn everything she could about this instrument that had somehow unlocked a part of her she never knew existed. For the first time in her life, Rosa had a secret worth keeping. And for the first time in her life, she had something to look forward to. She didn't know where this path would lead. She didn't know what any of it meant. But as she pushed her mop down the quiet hallway, a small smile crossed her face. Maybe her life wasn't meant to be so small after all. Weeks passed, and Rosa's secret grew deeper. Every night after her cleaning shift, she would make her way to that storage room at the back of the building. She would pull the tarp off the piano, sit down on that old cracked bench, and play until her fingers ached and her eyes grew heavy. She still couldn't explain how she did it. The music just came. Sometimes soft and slow, like a lullaby for a child who couldn't sleep. Sometimes wild and fast, like a storm rolling across an open plain. Every night brought something different, and every night Rosa discovered something new about herself. She started paying attention to the patterns, the way certain notes sounded good together and others clashed, the way her left hand kept a steady rhythm while her right hand wandered and explored. She didn't have a teacher or a book or even a video to learn from. She just listened to what her hands were doing and tried to understand. During the day, when she should have been sleeping, Rosa found herself searching for answers. She went to the public library and checked out books about music theory. She watched videos online of famous pianists, studying the way their fingers moved across the keys. She learned the names of the notes and the difference between major and minor chords. It was like learning a new language, except somehow she already knew how to speak it. She just didn't know the words yet. The more she learned, the more amazed she became. What she was doing at that piano wasn't normal. People studied for years to play the way she played. They went to expensive schools and practiced for hours every single day. And here she was, a 34-year-old cleaning lady with no training, playing music that made her own heart stop. But Rosa never told anyone. Who would believe her? She could already imagine the looks on their faces, the doubt, the laughter. Oh, sure, they would say. A janitor who can play piano like a professional. Right. And she couldn't blame them. If someone told her the same story, she probably wouldn't believe it either. So she kept her secret locked away in that storage room, hidden under a dusty tarp in the back of a building nobody cared about. Some nights, she played pieces she had heard before. Classical music from the videos she watched. She would listen to a recording once or twice, and somehow her fingers would figure out how to play it. Not perfectly, but close enough that it scared her. Other nights, she played her own music, melodies that came from nowhere and everywhere at the same time. Songs that told the story of her life without using a single word. Those were the nights that meant the most to her. When she played her own compositions, she felt like she was finally saying all the things she had never been able to say out loud. All the loneliness and the longing and the quiet hope that maybe, just maybe, there was more to her life than emptying trash cans and mopping floors. Rosa started to look forward to work in a way she never had before. The cleaning was still boring, but it didn't matter anymore. It was just something she had to get through before she could sit down at that piano and let the music take over. She also became more careful. She would wait until she was absolutely sure the building was empty before going to the storage room. She kept the door closed tight and played as softly as she could, worried that someone might hear. The last thing she wanted was for anyone to find out. But secrets have a way of slipping out, no matter how hard you try to hold on to them. It happened on a Tuesday night in early December. Rosa had finished her shift and was sitting at the piano, lost in a piece she had been working on for days. It was slow and beautiful, full of aching sadness and quiet strength. She had her eyes closed, letting the music flow through her, not paying attention to anything else. She didn't hear the footsteps in the hallway. She didn't hear the door creak open. She didn't know anyone was there until she opened her eyes and saw him standing in the doorway. Her hands froze on the keys. The music stopped dead. It was the old caretaker. His name was Walter, and he had worked at the community center for longer than anyone could remember. He was in his 70s, with white hair and deep wrinkles, and eyes that always seemed to be thinking about something far away. Rosa had seen him around the building a few times, but they had never really talked. He worked days and she worked nights, and their paths rarely crossed. But here he was, standing in the doorway of her secret room, staring at her like he had just seen a ghost. Rosa felt her face go hot with shame. She stood up quickly, knocking the bench backward. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice shaking. "I know I shouldn't be in here. I just found it a few weeks ago, and I don't know what came over me. I'll leave. I won't touch it again." She was already moving toward the door, ready to run, ready to pretend this never happened. But Walter didn't step aside. He just stood there, blocking her path, looking at her with an expression she couldn't read. "How long have you been playing?" he asked. Rosa stopped. She didn't know what to say. I don't really play," she stammered. "I mean, I never learned. I just kind of figured it out, I guess." Walter's eyebrows went up. "You figured it out?" "I know it sounds crazy. I can't explain it. I just sit down and the music comes out." She felt stupid saying it out loud. It sounded even more ridiculous than she thought it would. But Walter didn't laugh. He didn't roll his eyes or shake his head. Instead, he walked slowly into the room, his old knees creaking with every step. He stopped in front of the piano and ran his hand along the dusty surface. "This piano belonged to my wife," he said quietly. "She passed away 12 years ago. She used to teach lessons here at the center, back when we had the funding for that kind of thing. After she died, I couldn't bear to get rid of it, so I put it back here, out of sight. I haven't heard anyone play it since." Rosa felt her heart tighten. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know." Walter shook his head. "Don't be sorry. She would have loved knowing someone was using it again." He looked at Rosa, and for the first time, she saw something warm in his eyes. "That piece you were playing, what was it called?" Rosa hesitated. "It doesn't have a name. I made it up." Walter stared at her for a long moment. Then he did something that surprised her more than anything that had happened in the past few weeks. He smiled. "You made that up," he repeated, like he was testing the words to see if they were real. "A woman who has never taken a piano lesson in her life sat down and played something like that, something that beautiful, something that real." Rosa didn't know what to say. She just stood there, her hands twisting together nervously. Walter pulled the bench back up and gestured for her to sit down. Rosa hesitated, then slowly took her seat. "Play it again," he said. "From the beginning." "I don't know if I can. It's not like I have it memorized. It just kind of happens." "Then let it happen." Rosa looked at the keys. Her heart was still pounding, but something in Walter's voice made her feel safe. Like maybe, Just maybe she didn't have to hide anymore. She placed her fingers on the keys and began to play. The music filled the room again, and this time Rosa wasn't alone. Walter stood beside the piano, his eyes closed, listening to every note. When she finished, he didn't say anything for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "The world needs to hear this," he said. "You can't keep this hidden in a storage room forever." Rosa shook her head. "I'm nobody. I'm just a cleaner. Who's going to care about someone like me?" Walter looked at her with eyes that had seen a lot of life. "That's exactly why they'll care," he said. "Because you're real. Because this is real. And because people are hungry for something real in a world full of fake." Rosa wanted to argue. She wanted to list all the reasons why it was a terrible idea. But deep down, in a place she was just starting to discover, she knew he was right. Something had to change. And maybe, just maybe, she was finally ready to let it. Rosa tried to forget what Walter had said. She told herself it was a nice thought, but nothing more. The idea of performing in front of people made her stomach turn. She wasn't a performer. She wasn't even a real musician. She was just a woman who happened to find a piano in a storage room and discovered she could make sounds that didn't hurt to listen to. But Walter wouldn't let it go. He started showing up at the community center after hours, waiting for Rosa to finish her cleaning shift so they could talk. At first, she avoided him. She would take longer routes through the building or pretend she didn't see him sitting in the lobby. But Walter was patient. He had the kind of patience that only comes from living a long life and learning that some things are worth waiting for. One night, about 2 weeks after he first heard her play, he finally cornered her in the hallway. "There's a winter fundraiser coming up," he said. "Every year the center hosts it to raise money for programs. There's food, games, a little talent show, nothing fancy, maybe 80 people. Rosa shook her head before he even finished. "No, just one song," Walter said. "That's all I'm asking. One song. I can't." "You can. I've heard you." "That's different. That's just me alone in a room. Playing in front of people is something else entirely. I wouldn't even know how to begin." Walter crossed his arms. "You begin by sitting down and putting your fingers on the keys, same as you do every night." Rosa felt a wave of frustration rise in her chest. Why couldn't he understand? This wasn't about the music. It was about everything else. The stares. The judgment. The moment when everyone in the room realized she was nobody special and wondered why she was wasting their time. "You don't get it," she said. "People like me don't do things like that. We stay in the background. We don't get up on stages and expect people to listen." Walter was quiet for a moment. Then he said something that hit Rosa harder than she expected. "My wife used to say the same thing. She grew up poor, just like you. She didn't think she deserved to be heard. But she was wrong. And so are you." Rosa didn't have an answer for that. She just stood there, gripping the handle of her mop, wishing she could disappear. Walter reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He handed it to her. "The fundraiser is on December 20th. That's 3 weeks from now. Think about it. That's all I ask." He walked away before she could say no again. Rosa unfolded the paper. It was a flyer for the event. Bright colors, clip art, snowflakes, all the details printed in a cheerful font. At the bottom, in small letters, it said, "Talent Showcase sign-up at the front desk." She crumpled the paper and shoved it in her pocket. For the next few days, Rosa tried to push the whole thing out of her mind. She went to work, did her cleaning, played the piano in secret, and went home. Normal routine. Safe routine. But something had shifted. Every time she sat down at that piano now, she thought about Walter's words. She thought about his wife, a woman she never met, who had once felt the same way Rosa did. She thought about all the people who might be sitting in the audience at that fundraiser, tired and cold and looking for something to make them feel alive. Could she give them that? Did she even have the right to try? The days kept passing. December 20th crept closer. Rosa still hadn't signed up for anything. She told herself she wasn't going to do it. She told herself it was a stupid idea, but she also couldn't stop practicing. Every night she played that same piece over and over, the one she had been working on since the beginning, the one that told the story of her whole life. She played it until her fingers knew every note by heart, until the music flowed out of her like breathing. 1 week before the fundraiser, Rosa walked past the front desk on her way to clock in. There was a clipboard sitting on the counter with a sign that said, "Talent Showcase Sign Up." Most of the slots were already filled. A children's choir, a man who juggled, a teenager who did magic tricks. Rosa stared at the empty line at the bottom of the list. Her hand twitched at her side. Before she could talk herself out of it, she grabbed the pen and wrote her name. Then she walked away as fast as she could, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might explode. The night of the fundraiser arrived faster than Rosa was ready for. The community center had been transformed. Colored lights hung from the ceiling. Tables were covered with donated food and drinks. A small stage had been set up at the front of the main hall with a rented piano sitting in the center. Rosa stood backstage, if you could even call it that. It was really just a storage closet with a curtain in front of it. Her hands were shaking so badly she had to press them against her legs to keep them still. She felt sick. She felt dizzy. She felt like the biggest fool in the world for thinking she could do this. From behind the curtain, she could hear the sounds of the event. People laughing, kids running around, the MC making jokes that got polite chuckles. The talent show had already started. She listened to the children's choir sing a holiday song. She heard scattered applause and encouraging cheers. Her turn was coming. Rosa closed her eyes and tried to breathe. She thought about running. The back door was right there. She could slip out and no one would even notice. She could go home and pretend she never signed that stupid clipboard. But then she thought about Walter. She thought about his wife and the piano that had been sitting alone in the dark for 12 years. She thought about all those nights she had spent playing in secret, wishing someone could hear. This was her chance. Maybe her only chance. The MC's voice cut through her thoughts. And now, please welcome to the stage, Rosa. No last name, no introduction, just Rosa. She pushed through the curtain and walked toward the stage. The room wasn't huge, but it felt enormous. 80 people sat at round tables, their faces lit by the glow of string lights. They looked at her with polite curiosity. A few smiled. Most just waited. Rosa sat down at the piano. The bench was different from the one in the storage room. The keys were cleaner, brighter. But when she placed her fingers on them, they felt the same. They felt like home. She didn't say anything. She didn't introduce herself or explain what she was about to play. She just closed her eyes, took one last breath, and began. The first notes were soft, tentative, like a whisper in a quiet room. But as she played, the music grew. It swelled and stretched, filling every corner of the hall. The melody she had practiced 100 times poured out of her, but it felt different now. It felt bigger, more real. Like it finally had somewhere to go. Rosa forgot about the audience. She forgot about her fear. She forgot about everything except the music and the moment and the feeling of finally being exactly where she was supposed to be. When she finished, the last note hung in the air for what felt like forever. Then silence. Rosa opened her eyes. For one horrible second, she thought she had failed. No one was moving. No one was clapping. The room was completely still. Then she saw the woman in the front row. She was older, maybe 60, with silver hair and glasses. And she was crying. Not sad crying. Something deeper than that. Then someone started to clap. One person, then two. Then the whole room. People were standing up. They were cheering. Some of them were wiping their eyes. The applause kept building, louder and louder, until it filled the room like a wave. Rosa sat at the piano, her hands still resting on the keys, and let herself feel it. For the first time in her life, she let herself believe that maybe she was worth listening to after all. Walter was standing in the back of the room. He wasn't clapping, he was just smiling, his old eyes shining with tears. He gave her a small nod. That was all. But it was enough. Rosa had spent her whole life hiding in the background. Tonight, for 7 minutes, she had stepped into the light, and everything was about to change. Rosa went home that night feeling like she was floating. The applause still echoed in her ears. The faces of the people in the audience, some of them crying, some of them smiling, kept flashing through her mind. She had done it. She had actually done it. And somehow, against all odds, it had worked. She slept better that night than she had in years. The next morning, Rosa woke up to her phone buzzing. She didn't get many calls, so she figured it was a wrong number or maybe spam. But when she picked it up, she saw a flood of notifications she didn't understand. Messages from numbers she didn't recognize. Emails filling up her inbox. Something was happening, but she had no idea what. She opened one of the messages. It was from a woman she had never met, someone from a town 3 states away. "I just watched the video of you playing piano. I cried for 10 minutes straight. You are incredible. Please never stop playing." Video? What video? Rosa sat up in bed, her heart starting to race. She opened her social media app, something she barely ever used, and searched her own name. What she found made her drop her phone. Someone at the fundraiser had recorded her entire performance. A teenager in the back row holding up a phone, capturing the whole thing. They had posted it online with a simple caption. "This lady cleans our community center. She found an old piano in a closet. Watch what happens." The video had been shared thousands of times, then tens of thousands. By the time Rosa was sitting in her bed, staring at her cracked phone screen, it had been viewed over 2 million times, and the number was still climbing. Rosa didn't know what to do. She just sat there, scrolling through comments from strangers all over the world. "I'm crying at work right now. This is the most beautiful thing I've ever heard. How does someone with no training play like this? She's a gift. Her story gives me hope. If she can find her purpose at 34, maybe it's not too late for me either." The comments kept coming. Hundreds of them. Then thousands. People were sharing her story like it was their own. Like her music had touched something deep inside them that they didn't even know was there. By the end of the day, Rosa's phone was ringing non-stop. News stations wanted to interview her. Radio shows wanted to talk to her. A producer from a morning talk show reached out, asking if she would fly to New York to perform live on television. Rosa felt like she was drowning. This wasn't supposed to happen. She was just a cleaner who played piano in a storage room. She wasn't ready for any of this. She called Walter. His voice was calm, steady, the way it always was. "Take a breath," he said. "You don't have to say yes to everything, but don't say no to everything either. This is your moment. You get to decide what to do with it." Over the next few weeks, Rosa's life changed in ways she never could have imagined. She did a few interviews, small ones at first, then bigger ones. She played on local news programs, and then on national ones. People kept calling her the janitor pianist, a nickname she wasn't sure she liked but couldn't escape. Record labels started reaching out. Music schools offered her scholarships. A famous pianist, someone Rosa had watched in videos while teaching herself, sent her a personal message saying he was moved by her story and wanted to meet her. It was overwhelming. Some days Rosa wanted to hide. She wanted to go back to her quiet life, her empty hallways, her secret room with the dusty piano. But she knew she couldn't. That door had closed behind her, and a new one had opened. She made careful choices. She turned down the offers that felt wrong, the ones that wanted to turn her into something she wasn't. She said yes to the ones that felt true. a small recording contract with a company that promised to let her make her own music. An invitation to perform at a concert hall in her home state, playing her original compositions for a sold-out crowd. But the thing that mattered most to Rosa wasn't the fame or the money. It was what she decided to do with it. She couldn't stop thinking about her childhood, all those years bouncing from one foster home to another, all those nights wondering if she would ever matter to anyone. If someone had put a piano in front of her back then, would her life have been different? Would she have found herself sooner? She would never know the answer. But she could make sure other kids got the chance she never had. Rosa used the money from her recording contract to start a music program for foster children. It wasn't big at first, just a few donated keyboards and a rented room, but it grew. Other people heard about what she was doing and wanted to help. Donations came in. Volunteers showed up. Within a year, the program had spread to 3 different cities. Rosa visited whenever she could. She would sit with the kids, some of them shy and scared, some of them angry and closed off, and she would show them how to play, not with fancy techniques or complicated theory, just simple notes, simple songs, just enough to let them feel what she had felt that first night in the storage room. "You don't have to be perfect," she would tell them. "You don't have to know what you're doing. You just have to start." Some of the kids took to it right away, others didn't. But Rosa never gave up on any of them. She knew what it felt like to be invisible, to believe that you had nothing to offer the world. And she knew how wrong that belief could be. The community center where it all started became the headquarters of her program. The storage room was cleaned out and turned into a proper music space. The old piano, the one that had belonged to Walter's wife, was restored and placed in the main hall where everyone could see it. A small plaque on the side read, "Where it all began." Walter still came by almost every day. He was too old to do much, but he liked to sit in the corner and listen to the kids practice. Sometimes Rosa would catch him with his eyes closed, a peaceful smile on his face, and she knew he was thinking about his wife, about how happy she would be to see her piano bringing joy to so many people. One afternoon, a young girl from the program came up to Rosa after a lesson. She was about 10 years old, quiet and serious, with big brown eyes that reminded Rosa of herself at that age. "Can I ask you something?" the girl said. "Of course." "How did you know you were good at piano? How did you know you had a gift?" Rosa thought about it for a moment. She remembered that first night in the storage room. The cold air, the dusty keys, the feeling of her fingers moving on their own. "I didn't know," she said honestly. "I just tried, and I kept trying. That's the only secret." The girl nodded slowly like she was storing the words away for later. Rosa watched her walk back to the keyboard and start practicing again. The notes were clumsy, out of rhythm, nothing special, but the girl was trying. And that was everything. Rosa walked over to the window and looked out at the parking lot. It was the same view she had seen 1,000 times when she was just a cleaner pushing a mop through empty hallways. But nothing about her life was the same anymore. She had spent 34 years believing she was ordinary, believing she had nothing to give, believing that people like her didn't get to have big dreams or happy endings. She was wrong. And every time she sat down at a piano, every time she watched a child play their first note, every time she heard someone say that her music had touched their heart, she was reminded of a simple truth. It's never too late to find out who you really are. All you have to do is start.